Thank you, sir. So I was pleased to follow the chair of the Scrutiny Review Panel, who gave a very eloquent speech outlining the very thorough nature of their comprehensive review, which, of course, was taken in a short time frame, given the restrictions placed upon it. Yet, sir, I do still have some doubt. That doubt is due to a number of factors which I do not feel were considered in the report and which I will outline. Also, alongside the polling, which I welcome, the views of our Youth Assembly also need to be taken into account today, and I'm grateful to the Dean who so helpfully reminded us all of their views. Doubt, sir, can affect us and every islander on many issues. The standard advice for anyone experiencing doubt is, of course, and particularly on a serious matter, if in doubt, don't. Unlike the Constable of St Helier, my position since 2021 has changed somewhat, and I share many of the concerns that he identified in his excellent speech, so I have shortened my own, you'll be grateful to hear. But I consider it important to place on the record my reasons for changing my stance. I understand the need for choice, but I also believe that we have to take decisions here on our own conscience, and today we have to be absolutely clear that when we have doubt, and make sure that we do not hold any doubt when we move to a vote today. In 2021, I stated that I would want to be assured that appropriate safeguards would be in place. And so I'm afraid that my concerns outweigh the arguments for moving to the next phase of introducing this legislation. Having reflected deeply and after reading the detail of the proposition before us, plus many other related papers and, of course, the many emails that we have received, I consider that we have to get our own house in better order before taking this step to deliver a new and a complex service. It is important to remind members that many of the members of the citizens' jury themselves changed their minds during that process. Dr. Alexandra Mullock, a senior lecturer in healthcare law and co-director of the Centre of Social Ethics and Policy at the University of Manchester, assisted the citizens' jury process. And she was quoted to observe, and I quote, "I was quite surprised by the outcome of the citizens' jury in Jersey. They had many hours of very balanced evidence from campaigners, religious groups and doctors. They heard evidence about the law in lawful jurisdictions. I was very surprised that they decided they wanted to take quite a permissive, liberal approach based on the concerns that they had heard. That is not my position. I feel quite worried about what has happened in some places like Canada and the Netherlands." End of quote. Like the Constable of St Helier, I believe it is important to consider the time it will take to draft legislation and go through that process. Time should instead be spent, in my view, ensuring that the 61 recommendations of the Massey-Taylor report on clinical governance are met. The Dean mentioned the difficulties that some practitioners have in conflicts that may arise as a result of the legislation being brought in. The Massey-Taylor report made it quite clear, sir, that relationships between senior healthcare practitioners are already quite strained enough. There are also the findings of the Royal College of Physicians report on our rheumatology department and the learning that must be dealt with. Just today, in reporting, the patients of our rheumatology department have begun to receive letters informing them of the next steps. Bailiwick Express quoted from the Royal College of Physicians report, and I quote, "The report revealed a lack of governance, not just in rheumatology, but across the healthcare organisation." End of quote. Yesterday, we agreed to the strategic plan for the next 2 years. The refrain of the new leadership has been that they want to focus on carefully selected work that the organisation of government is able to deliver within its current size and scale. Yet this, the next item, is to add a new service with additional cost, yet another in a string of contradictions. Just yesterday, in oral questions, the Health Minister claimed it is all about money. It is very clear that the focus should be on improving the ability of health and community services to provide the best quality of care and assurance of standards for patients within our existing services. This debate is, of course, about offering choice and an alternative to suffering. But we do have to be practical in what are challenging times. As one doctor who has written to us reminds us, members of the public and the voluntary sector have invested time and energy in producing the suicide prevention strategy, the dementia strategy, the neurodiversity strategy, and updating the mental health improvement plan for the island, but there is no money for this work. Close quote. Last year, the previous Health Minister successfully negotiated an additional £56 million for the health service and began a financial recovery plan to ensure that money was spent carefully and within an accountable framework when delivering care for our services after the turnaround team discovered what they described as uncontrolled spending in this, our biggest and highest spending department. Trust, sir, is an issue that needs, as we all know, to be built, and there is considerable need to improve trust of the public and particularly amongst our elder population. As members have acknowledged, there is a theory that this proposal is an attempt to save money on care for the elderly as our population in the over 80s grows. Whilst I do not believe at all that that is the case, I do understand why some people feel like that. At a time when it is important to build and improve public trust and confidence, supporting that proposal will cause potentially further erosion of trust. We need to continue our work to build that trust and confidence in our island's institutions, particularly those of the older age group who feel that this is part of a saving exercise. And Canada, as many have pointed out, has openly suggested that the introduction of their assisted dying service has indeed brought down their spending on healthcare. So my grandmother spent the last 10 years of her life largely bedridden after losing the use of her legs. Despite her limited life, her reliance on carers who patiently moved her pillows and turned her on request, she was able to keep up with family events, provide sage advice, and shortly before she died, she held her first great-grandchild. Although our conclusions differ, sir, I agree with Deputy Jean's comments about the importance of care and protection for our older generation. They are not burdens. They have wisdom to share and should live in the knowledge that we're grateful for their contributions and the way that they have formed our society. Investment is required in our existing health services and the assurance of quality of those services. Jersey should and could be a beacon of good practice, a place that creates blue zone status due to the quality and longevity of islanders' lives. That requires further time and great investment. We are, in my view, not ready to adopt the proposition today.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start, as others have done, with some thanks. I want to thank all those who've been in touch with me personally or with members generally. It has been exceptionally informative and helpful to hear a wide range of views and be provoked to consider the questions raised by the proposition from many different angles. I want to thank the officers who have developed and guided these proposals with exceptional patience and calmness. And I want to thank the Minister and previous ministers for their work in bringing forward these proposals with great care. And I want to thank everybody who's spoken in this debate because I have found it exceptionally informative and illuminating. So I want to say a few words about where I stand on this. And my first point is that I am satisfied that it is clear from public consultation that there is strong public support in the island for assisted dying in principle. Put another way, not a single survey or poll has shown majority opposition to assisted dying, not even close. So that is my starting point. And I make that point notwithstanding the volume of correspondence we've had from opponents. However, even if it is right that the public at large does support assisted dying, that does not get us that far. We have before us detailed proposals, and whilst they need to be assessed in the light of public support for the principle, that does not guarantee that these particular proposals should be voted through. We still have choices to make. So let me say where I stand. My speech is on the theme of balancing risks. There are no absolutes here, in my view. There are balances of rights and risks. I believe that on the balance of risks, we should support Route 1. My reasons are that it can be tightly drawn, restrictive in scope, and clear in implementation. I take note of the moral objections passionately made, but I am of the view that they are outweighed by the case for allowing those who face an agonising end to their lives to have a way out of their own choosing. No one who is morally opposed to assisted dying need participate, either by choosing an assisted death for themselves or by assisting someone else's death. Neither do I think the so-called slippery slope argument carries much plausibility in the case of Route 1. The metaphor of a slippery slope is clear. It implies a loss of control, an accidental or unintended extension of the right to die. But Route 2 cannot happen by accident if we adopt Route 1. It cannot happen, as we've heard from the Solicitor General, by judicial command. It cannot happen out of sight. If we are to go to Route 2 in the future, it will only be possible after a debate in the Assembly. And if this debate is anything to go by, it will be preceded by the fullest and most careful consideration. There are arguments against Route 1, but this is where I think the question of balance comes into the equation. One argument is that health professionals are opposed. But society is divided on this. It is not surprising to me that medical staff have different views as well. I don't think that should constitute a reason for a veto. The main argument used against Route 1, it seems to me, is that safeguards might fail. There is a slippage in the argument. There is a slippage in the arguments, I think, that are used against assisted dying in this case. To take one example, it is argued that it is possible a terminal diagnosis could be in error. Indeed, in theory, it could. But the argument that a terminal diagnosis could be in error does not mean that it is a realistic possibility in cases where assisted dying is being requested or that will lead to an assisted death. Remember, two different diagnoses must be given, with the second one being given by a doctor independent of the first and without seeing the assessment of the first. These diagnoses will be written within 6 months of expected death. If there is uncertainty about whether death is more than 6 months away, then assisted dying will not be possible. 1 year, of course, in the case of certain conditions. There are exceptionally rare circumstances in which people have been told that they have a limited life expectancy who end up outliving the projections. However, they are not likely to be relevant in the case of requests for assisted dying. Once you get within 6 months or less of death, the range of possible outcomes shrinks dramatically, and the certainty of death and the accuracy of predictions about its timing becomes greater. Deputy Howell gave examples of people who've been wrongly diagnosed, but those cases were not diagnosed in the context of assisted dying. They weren't subjected to the kind of intensive analysis that will be required under the proposition. What is more, it is clear that people do not choose assisted dying simply because of a diagnosis. As one doctor writing in Jersey put it, the urge to live is very strong, and I'm sure we all recognise that. People do not take up the option of assisted dying unless they are in great pain. And that happens close to the end, when the diagnosis is all too certain. So there may be a vanishingly small possibility of a mistake, but that has to be balanced against the other side of the equation, namely the pain that will be caused by denying assisted dying to those in desperate need. Now, I know that for some opponents of assisted dying, there is no other side of the equation, because there is no circumstance in which choosing an assisted death is morally justifiable. I respectfully disagree. We do have to balance these two sides, and when you do, the balance seems to me to lie with allowing people in desperate pain the chance to choose the time and manner of their death. However, I do have reservations about Route 2. So why not go to the next stage? It will take a lot of effort to develop the processes and procedures and organisation around Route 2. There are exceptionally complex moral and practical issues that are engaged around Route 2. And I worry that it may stretch the process of designing the service. If we pass Route 2, the risk is that we find ourselves quite quickly in very complex and controversial cases. So I return to my point about the balance of risks. Route 2 is more complex, and the balance is much harder to weigh. There is a potential for slippage. The exercise of one person's freedom of choice could have wider implications for society in terms of valuing lives. For example, people living with severe disabilities. As Deputy Balash said, the ethical review is relevant and important in this context. But the other issue that weighs on the scales is the issue of safeguards. Route 2 opens up potentially exceptionally complex cases. The design, therefore, of an assisted dying service that offers Route 2 is going to be complex, requiring considerable effort and resource and many difficult judgments. And I have to say that there is an interaction here with the issues of clinical governance and clinical standards and resources that are currently affecting the department and with the Minister's response to them. I could go into that in more detail, but members will, I think, understand the issues to which I'm alluding. In summary, I would rather all the effort went into getting Route 1 right, given the issues with which the department is already struggling. Given that there are significant and well-argued risks around Route 2, I ask myself, what is the greatest risk if we do not pass Route 2? And that is clear, I think. The risk is that some people who are not yet dying but are suffering incredible pain they regard as unacceptable may find themselves unable to access assisted dying. We've all heard, and it's been referenced several times, from at least one islander in this category in the run-up to this debate. And that is an agonising situation and a very difficult choice for us. I try and put myself in that position, and I strongly suspect I would want a way out. But it is a balance. I have in mind that we will retain the right to amend the law. And if these cases are surfaced and the cases are strong, we can revisit. It will be agonising for those who are currently in the Route 2 camp if we do not go down that route. But again, we must weigh the risks, because this is not a decision that can be taken on its own. We have to consider what impacts one person's freedom will have on society as a whole. On one side is the view expressed most powerfully by Deputy Doublé, that we have a duty to ensure that those in pain do not suffer. I note the view expressed by a practitioner of assisted dying in Australia who addressed a meeting of the States members some while ago now, who said that the hardest thing she had to do was say no to someone who wanted to die because they didn't meet the criteria. We have to accept that we cannot satisfy all the demands for assisted dying. Even if we pass Route 2, there are categories excluded, people who would like the choice. And even under Route 1, some people will be turned down who may feel they should access assisted dying, should be able to access assisted dying. So we cannot end all suffering. As I've said, in the case of Route 1, I think the balance is clearly in favour. What kind of society do I want to live in? The Dean asked. One where terminally ill people in great pain can choose their own exit. Unbearable pain is much less clear. I note that to the jurisdictions with the rules and regulations I most respect, such as in different states in Australia, have assisted dying that aligns most clearly with Route 1 and do not allow Route 2. So to sum up, when I was much younger, I did a bit of rock climbing. I was very bad at it. But I did learn that in climbing, I found that if you took a step into the unknown, which climbing often involves, you make sure of your footing before you take the next step. So let's take the first step to Route 1 and then get our feet on firm ground. Find a secure footing. We can always move forward again. The balance of risks suggests that Route 1 is clear, but Route 2 has too much uncertainty. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. It is hard to follow many of the speakers today who have given so much time in understanding the areas all of us hopefully have. And I will start by, like other members, thanking those who have contacted us, sharing their wide range of perspectives. Standing Order 104 does mean we should not be repeating ourselves, and it is hard in particular to follow the really clear points made by many speakers on both sides, especially hard to follow Deputy Reniff with his clear description of the balances of risks of what is before us. So for me, this is a brief period to put my comments and perspectives on paper for those who have contacted me, who want to see where I have evaluated those risks versus those rights. I don't approach this completely afresh, despite not sitting in the Assembly last time. I provide weight to previous States Assembly in principle decisions, which were made with a body of evidence behind them, including the citizens' jury. That isn't to say we should support a blanket approval, but it does carry weight. I also thank that Deputy Tadier reminded us that this is a debate. This is not necessarily a chance just to rehearse our points. So I do think it's right to touch on comments around the priorities of government and funding within this. Some members have commented that the state of palliative care funding, the challenges within the health budget itself, are reasons not to pursue even legislative drafting. Some have commented why even officer time in drafting what we have has been undertaken. But it is clear that the Assembly took an in-principle decision to pursue this work, and so now is not the time to consider in retrospect whether the work undertaken to date was valid. In my view, sir, it was. Secondly, to those seeking greater funding instead for palliative care or end of life, and the Dean has made clear points about the reliance on the third sector for palliative care and the great work hospice and other charities do. I heard this argument often from, or this perspective from parishioners and from islanders, but we have to remind ourselves that no amount of palliative care will address a tortuous end of life that some go through. Duty has been a clear topic and often a divider between those who can support Route 1 only, or Route 1 and Route 2. And again, this has been questioned whether it is a fundamental change in society's beliefs we are taking. Although I don't entirely agree. I think the Health Minister was clear that the ambition is to be a society that cares for the rights and the pains of our islanders. I do think, and it was summed up far more clearly by Deputy Reniff, that the balance of risk is far clearer to Route 1 than Route 2, and that the duty on those who have a indefinite life expectancy to be up here, who may feel a burden, is still not clear enough. I do want to pick up, in the fashion of this being a debate and a chance to respond to each other, one example Deputy Waugh gave of a bereaving family member feeling how could their parent choose this path. I do want to highlight, without any place of opinion really about that member, that in that case again, that is a duty the family member expected on the person who wished to pursue their choice of end of life. They felt it was a duty to live, not a duty to die. And it can be viewed from all sides of relationships. I'll make it clear that whilst considering strongly the ethics within this, I do not consider religion or belief should be taken in making this matter. The secular nature of this assembly should be clear, and I am comfortable with the safeguards provided, including through the amendment provided, that those who do not wish to take part in the provision, whether clinical or administrative of the service, will not be compelled to. Touching further on safeguards, many correspondents have highlighted they do not ever believe safeguards could exist. And whilst I respect this position, and we have heard potentially the comparison to capital punishment, just a clear comparison between those who are clearly perhaps saying they do not want capital punishment against themselves versus those who have gone through the rigorous process outlined in the proposition of 2 independent assessments, appeals on either side to the Royal Court, does not make that, to me, an equal comparison to make. And I am reassured that any legislation brought forward will not include regulation or order-making power, and that our primacy of the Assembly is far different to those in other jurisdictions, such as the example made about Canada. The slippery slope has also been addressed, and to me, we have to judge what we are voting on today. Any change will be addressed by this Assembly and not by one person. It will always be for elected members to make that decision and then to be held accountable for it. On the right to choose, many who have written to me support the right to choose, and this is hard to disagree with in some circumstances. Many write about the right to choose in far wider ranging circumstances than even we are debating across Route 1 and Route 2 today. We also hear from those who describe how perhaps their loved ones have gone through what one might call an ideal end-of-life condition, and so they question the need. We know that not everyone is so fortunate in their end-of-life journey. What choice do they have to have family around them, to have some limited use of their body or their dignity? So finally, I would like to thank again those who have been in touch, and in particular, without naming, a parishioner who invited me into their home only the week after they withdrew from medication of a terminal illness. Whilst talking to her, she clearly provided many arguments and often candidly expressed the experience of her diagnosis, and that what she wanted to do was maximise her end-of-life quality. She wished the route was available, as she highlighted that knowing the pathway was there would bring further comfort. So with that, and I was very sad to read that she shared her views with ITV News, who reported she passed away last week. My thoughts are with her family.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this proposition? Deputy Kobach.
Thank you, sir. First and foremost, like others, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to all who contributed to the comprehensive report on assisted dying. This report is a testament to the collective effort of numerous individuals, including the public, who actively participated in the process through emails, meetings, and presentations, expressing their views both in favor and against the proposition. I didn't get the chance to reply to all the large numbers of emails coming in either, but they have been appreciated and their content has been noted, helping balance on my decision today. The report on assisted dying is comprehensive and emotionally charged. The topic of life and death is deeply personal and affects us all. The citizens' jury's involvement, the health ministers and previous ministers and departments' contributions are noteworthy. The report also sought input from various clinical professional organizations and considered international perspectives. Substantial research has been conducted to inform the Assembly's decision. Given the turnover of the Assembly members since the last debate, it seems appropriate to revisit and thoroughly debate this issue, which I'm glad to see we do. It's crucial to consider all aspects carefully, including protecting the vulnerable and the value of caregivers in our community, along alleviating the suffering for many at their end of life or in agony. In one way or another, we have all experienced the death of loved ones, some in more peaceful circumstances and others in more distressing situations. Personally, I have had close relatives who passed away after suffering from multiple strokes or cancer at different stages. Throughout it all, our family recognized the value and importance of their continued presence in our lives for as long as possible. We strive to help them see the worth of life surrounded by love and all the support possible, even during their most challenging moments. Sorry. Aside from alleviating the prolonged suffering this proposition would bring for a few of those suffering, whom I deeply empathize with, we also need to consider the potential issue that may arise if such a service is introduced. Therefore, I'll try to highlight a few. Sorry. Firstly, during COVID-19, we rightly prioritized protecting the vulnerable and the elderly to ensure their health and safety. Secondly, many people have dedicated their professional lives to giving care and comfort, as well as caregivers who, whether paid or unpaid, provide 24/7 support for many in our community who are increasingly reliant upon them. The emotional attachment and value that caregivers contribute on a day-in, day-out basis is not always appreciated and valued enough. It is not measurable outcome for accountants or someone looking at figures. In Deputy Sfer's speech, we heard a clear example of how valuable headway support was for many vulnerable islanders in great suffering, and how they managed to turn the situation around and make it more bearable for so many, and like this are other organizations. Sir, I believe in the gift and value of life, and we are all aware that some will go through the journey to the other end with a smoother passage than others. We don't choose when and whether to be born, even though some will come to exist into a life of ongoing terrible suffering in different ways, not just health-wise. A life that they have not chosen, nor can they always change. These people can develop depression or mental health issues or not. Some of those end up wanting to commit suicide, to which then, as one of the responses, we come up with a suicide prevention strategy and see how we can help them to see the life worthy. On the other hand, then we come to a very sensitive and emotional situation when one may have a severe illness and may want to die, so assisted dying is offered. As some public members exemplified in emails, if you see the same person wanting to jump on a bridge, you wouldn't instinctively try to stop them and see how you can help them avoid that happening. Aren't these two services offering contradicting each other? Sometimes the decision to use assisted dying could come on the consideration that they might develop great suffering or die very soon, without knowing for sure if that's exactly how it will happen in their case, or if it might take much longer to deteriorate. They could still be helped to improve how they feel in different ways and find life worthy. In such cases, wouldn't that be a wrong death if going ahead with the initial decision? How do we differentiate between the two situations? I understand the concerns about prolonging the suffering to the terminally ill. However, it's essential to consider the potential risk and ethical implications of assisted dying, especially in terms of safeguarding vulnerable individuals. The concerns about the impact on people with disabilities, the elderly, and those who may feel pressured to end their lives prematurely are valid. The minister has admitted you can't change human nature. Cases of coercion, with awareness or not, even to the parts involved, are very possible with all the safeguards in place, when it could be tough to define or identify what level of great suffering is unbearable to qualify for such service, especially when talking about Route 2. Many keep referring to what happens if widening the service in other jurisdictions where it's offered, and it started limited, with the promises that won't be extended as invalid. I would say that is very valid because once it's on and proves the possibility to extend the criteria is there is a precedent. Although only the Assembly could make such changes in Jersey, with different compositions of the Assembly at different times, I kept on seeing similar examples with other propositions, both from Jersey and other places, with the assurance that things won't change, and guess what? They did change. So there's the precedent, and that's enough not to trust that this doesn't raise concerns that it can't happen here in the future. I recently saw in the news that a 29-year-old Dutch woman who was physically healthy but suffered from depression and autism was approved for assisted dying. Her case raised concerns because assisted dying for people with mental health conditions isn't the usual practice there, but they say that now cases like this are rising and there's a precedent. Then there are concerns around the medical practitioners and third party involved for two aspects. One, because of the low level of experience required, being sufficient 1 year post-registration to assess and approve a case. In normal medical practices, a doctor won't even be able to do a DNA without much more practice than 1 year. How is this showing sufficient safeguard that cases will be assessed correctly? Second, because of the trauma that can be left behind, both the practitioners and dear ones decided to assist, even if voluntarily stepped in, without mentioning the ones that don't necessarily have a choice to be involved in such process, like the pharmacist, auxiliary staff, etc. I want to share an example of how assisting in a similar difficult situation like this can deeply impact someone. A friend went through a tough time when her mother fell seriously ill. Her mother spent a long time in the hospital, sometimes getting better, sometimes getting worse, and needing machines to help her survive. At one point, her mother expressed that she didn't want to continue living if she didn't improve soon, but she also asked for more time to spend with her daughter during the periods when she felt a little better. So although she wanted to die, she also wanted to live. Eventually, her mother had to be put in a coma and rely on machines to keep her alive while they explored some treatment options. Soon after, the hospital staff recommended stopping the treatment, saying that it wouldn't help and it was best to disconnect her from the machines. Struggling with the decision, my friend agreed, but she was left feeling consumed by guilt and constantly wondering if more could have been done to keep her mother alive longer. Despite believing she was doing what her mother would have wanted, the guilt took a heavy toll on her. She fell into a deep state of trauma and depression. It affected every aspect of her life, leading to the loss of her job and her relationship and the sense of herself for years, not being able to attach to someone ever since, as she keeps on asking herself, what if? Therefore, what strong enough safeguards are in place to avoid situations like this in the parts assisting directly in the process? The trust in the health system is broken because we often hear about misdiagnosis or misinterpretation of symptoms for different patients. How can we be sure that such cases can be properly assessed and identified if the people assessing them have such low levels of experience? It is important to consider trust in the healthcare system. There are instances where, due to a lack of available beds or high cost of treatments, medical staff may be reluctant to communicate openly with patients or may even try to convince them that certain treatments are necessary. We've seen that in current days. In such situations, it's easy to assume that this lack of transparency could also extend to persuading patients to consider assisted dying, especially in cases where long-term care is deemed too difficult and costly. How confident would severely ill people be in receiving proper treatment if they were to walk in a hospital unit knowing that assisted dying is also offered there? The same question applies to care homes, where many elderly individuals and care home leaders share similar concerns. We have heard about serious incidents happening in the general hospital that show we are not even having basic care rightly done and resourced. The clinical governance leaves a lot to be desired, and the healthcare system, especially at this time, with a lack of proper investment, is definitely not a safe environment to introduce an assisted dying law with so few clear safeguards. Medical staff function under Hippocratic Oath with the basis to save lives. Many practitioners are worried about having assisted dying included in the health system and having medics assist in taking lives, as this goes against their code of practice and the reason they became doctors in the first place. Would this put off more doctors from entering our health system? We of course consider the emotional aspect, which is significant in this proposition. However, as members of the states, we are responsible for the budget constraints we are also having. We must also be pragmatic and prioritize where the available funds are most urgently needed, especially considering the rapid depletion of states' resources we could see in the near future. With that in mind, I will touch on a few points mentioned by few members. When, even if it might be repetition at points, I find it very valid. It's important to remember that members of the public and the third sector have put a lot of time and effort into developing strategies for suicide prevention, dementia, and neurodiversity, and updating the mental health improvement plan for the island. However, there is currently no funding for this work, no mandatory training on suicide prevention or capacity assessments, a significant need for 24/7 funded palliative care, and very high waiting list in many departments, and the list can go on. There's also a lack of sufficient specialists or equipment, and healthcare professionals are resigning or finding it very hard to hire replacements. If assisted dying is introduced in healthcare, there is a risk of losing more professionals, which would worsen the situation. A recent report from Scrutiny revealed that the Treasury Minister warned of a potential 18 million shortfall in this year's health budget and indicated that some hard decisions will need to be made to address it. We still do not have a proper hospital, and it's unclear how many hundreds of millions of pounds are still needed to make that a reality. On the other hand, the proposed assisted dying initiative would require an initial investment of 1 million plus an additional 1 million annually. This substantial investment is for a service that might only cater for about 10 people per year or even fewer, based on the percentage of users in other jurisdictions compared to our population. In contrast, a proposition from free GP visits for children, which was estimated to cost about 800,000 per year, to cater for about 17,500 children, was voted against by 22 members. They argued that there is no budget for it due to other priorities. Interestingly, many of those members are now supporting the allocation of about 2 million to cater for about 10 people through assisted dying, even though alternative care or options could still be explored in some of those cases, maybe, to alleviate suffering, improve their lives, and give them purpose, whilst having more urgent priorities to sort in saving lives first. This seems contradictory. The 2 million allocated for assisted dying could be used to make significant improvements to healthcare services and improve the lives of many, even in terminal stages. Let's do this part of health right first. Let's find the money so needed for fixing our health system and deliver a hospital, and then we can look at other options. With that being said, sir, I won't be supporting this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this proposition? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. We spend most of our time in this Assembly seeking to ensure that islanders and parishioners live well, seeking to debate how we can improve islanders' lives. And that's right and proper. That's what we come into politics for. To improve the lives of islanders and to make long-term decisions for the benefit of all islanders. And members will know my voting record on this matter, and I've thought at length, as I think it is right that members should, about the questions that come into play when we are debating this today. And we've heard a lot of those good questions rehearsed in whatever side of the debate one is on, can only be described as excellent, informed speeches. So I think there are lots of good questions, and I want to just spend some moments exploring those now. But as we think about those good questions on both sides of the debate, I've come to the conclusion that there aren't necessarily always good answers. We've heard members presenting answers to those questions. And I was minded to think in this regard from a question that was put by a member at a briefing last Friday afternoon that I was able to attend. And it was the question about control and autonomy. It was a question that ran along the lines of the member had a friend with a terminal condition. It didn't say how long that friend had to live, but with a terminal condition, and I can only surmise from the question, coming towards the end of their life. And that friend wished to control the timing of their death so that they could be surrounded by their family, could be, in a way, celebrating the individual's life. And I'm not sure that there was a good answer to that question provided at that briefing, because I'm not sure if one is not in favour of assisted dying, that there is necessarily a good individual answer to that individual. And I was then having attended that briefing, one thing is for certain, sir, we have never had so many parishioners at our surgery as we had on Monday afternoon. They were almost queuing out of the door, and I left the Chief Minister, having spoken to a few of them, seeking to speak to him as well. So this has engaged islanders in the democratic process in a very positive way. And I mention that now because we had attending upon us a lovely gentleman who we had together what I hope was a sensitive conversation. I suspect, I could tell from the look on his face that when he asked me the question, I didn't provide the answer that he was looking for. And we discussed his experience. And the experience that he talked to me about, which was one of his wife who's passed away. And I did not have a good answer to it for him, because this gentleman's wife had been diagnosed with an incurable illness, with a terminal illness. But she had lived far longer than the initial diagnosis by several months, until the end of her life happened quite quickly in hospital. And those members that have had family members pass away in hospital will know that I don't think any one of us 49 members can say we would be happy with a family member passing away in a 7 or 8 bedded ward with curtains, the end of life being clear to all of the other people in that particular bay. And I could do nothing but say that is not appropriate in our age that people are passing away in those circumstances. But there wasn't time for his wife to get to hospice. So there isn't, there's only a difficult answer to that good question. But there are other good questions that there are also only difficult answers to. And we've heard some of them today. And that is about how we in our community protect vulnerable members of our community. We've heard some things which perhaps are on the side of being distasteful around those disabled members of our community. But we in Jersey have made great strides in the legislation and the protection and the understanding and the needs of those members of our community who find themselves disabled. And the same when it comes to understanding mental health conditions. We've made great strides. We are not there on either of those policy issues. But by agreeing to assisted dying, that does leave open the question of how we protect vulnerable individuals. And I don't think, despite all of the good work of the officials and the things that the Minister said and others have said, for my part, I don't think we yet have good answers about how, if we agree this today, we will properly protect the most vulnerable members of our community. Because the question of coercion is not a straightforward question where family members say to loved ones, we think you've got too old. We think you should go into a care home. They are much more subtle. They are very indirect. They are about how we, as a community, value everyone's life and what value we put on everyone's life. Another member talked about, yes, autonomy, but also agency. And there are many members who are vulnerable in our community who do not have the agency that we, as members of this assembly, have. It happens subtly. It happens indirectly. And as the Dean reminded us, where there is a will, there is a family. And I don't want to send any message from this assembly today that we don't value every life in our community and that we haven't got in place appropriate protections for the vulnerable and to ensure that there isn't coercion. We can do training. I appreciate the work that the Scrutiny Review have done, which will suggest that they think there are safeguards that could be put in place. But I am not yet convinced that we have good answers to that good question. We then come to the question of slippery slope, and it's been really moved into the sideline of saying, well, it can't happen in Jersey because we don't have the same situation that they have in Canada, where they have a constitutional court, where the court can, in effect, instruct that the legislature ensures that its provisions are in line with the Constitution. Of course we don't. Any changes to this legislation have to come to this Assembly, and long may that be the case. And I'm proud that the supreme body in this island, it doesn't always appear like that, sir, is this democratically elected legislature, and we should continue to fight for that. But that does not mean to say that those who come after us, that those, if we say yes today, won't experience the bureaucracy that most of us want put in place to ensure safeguards, where possible, won't be slowly undermined and amended, and we'll be having similar debates which will lead to what's described as the slippery slope. Having sat in this place as long as I have, I know that legislation comes and legislation goes, and the reason and rationale for making a particular decision can in future be overturned because of the lack of remembrance of the reason that we got there in the first place. So I don't think there is a good answer to the good question about slippery slope. And then we come to more difficult areas around misdiagnosis. I can't put a certain figure on what the quantum of misdiagnosis is in medicine across the globe. It's somewhere between 2 and 5%. Some would even say 10%. But I don't want to argue about the quantum. We have to acknowledge in this place that there is misdiagnoses. And medicine is not an exact science in the way that we sometimes think it is, or we've been led to believe that it is. And the reason I pick up on that point as well is to go to the current palliative care which is in place. And it's fair to say, I think, that we are better as a community dealing with do not resuscitate notices, with families talking about what they want for their loved ones at the end of life. But there is more progress to be made. And Deputy Barbara Ward spoke about her experience and about pain management and about pain relief. And these are important elements, because just as it's not straightforward, because each individual has a different physiological makeup and therefore the pain relief required is different, the same will be the case with the lethal medication that is required for end-of-life assisted dying processes. And so, sir, we can't be absolutely certain, as we know that the Minister has said he will come back on this, around that particular issue. I agree wholeheartedly with my friend the Treasury Minister, who said, if this debate does anything, whichever way members vote today, it'll have raised the subject of death and dying well in whichever way that is. And that can only be a positive thing for our community, because to a large extent, we have become sensitised to death. It's moved away from the everyday, and that is not good. We need to support each other and talk about death and talk about its implications. Of course, Deputy Renouf spoke about balance, and he is right. It does, at the end of the day, come down to balance. He may have balanced in a different way to the one that I will be balancing, but it is about balance. Deputy Cole said that he would not want his wife to have to undertake for him things that he didn't want her to, and I absolutely accept that. I say to my wife often, you really don't need to do that for me, darling, but the corollary of that is I would want to do for her absolutely anything, and it would not be an imposition for me to do that. And so we've got to take our personal experience that we've spoken about today, and all of us have a personal experience around families dying. We've got to take that personal experience or personal desire and step back from that and make the decision that we think is right for our community. And I ask members who are not sure, who are uncertain about whether they have good answers to those good questions, because for my part, we don't yet have good answers to all of those good questions. And therefore, again, I didn't vote for this in principle, and I will not be supporting it today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor of St Lawrence.
The in-principle debate in November 2021 was brought to the States by the Home Affairs Minister. Why the Home Affairs Minister? Because the Health Minister did not support assisted dying, and indeed he voted against it. My understanding was that there was a bit of a discussion around Council of Ministers table as to who was going to bring it to the States, because it was quite an uncomfortable proposition to bring forward. But we had quite a bold Home Affairs Minister, and he wasn't afraid to do that. He was subsequently not re-elected, but I'm not quite sure that had anything to do with it, but who knows? But why was it brought to the States? Because 78%, we've heard that mentioned a couple of times over the past couple of days, 78% of our first citizens' jury voted in favour of assisted dying in Jersey. 78% of 23 people. 23 people. And we've heard from Deputy Miles about the valid process that was undertaken. But those people who mentioned the 78% didn't mention that it was 78% of 23 people. And nor did they mention that the total resident population of Jersey on the 21st of March 2021, Census Day, was 103,267. So we are here today because 23 people from a resident population of 103,267 was enough at that time to persuade members in November 21 to look at options for the Jersey way of assisted dying. However, as we heard from Deputy Luce recently, when he was proposing the in-principle debate of a wind farm, if we agreed to pursue that for consideration and detail to be brought back to us, we could then throw it out when we had that detail brought back to us following approval of the in-principle debate. And that's exactly what we could do today, because this is the follow-up to an in-principle debate when we said we'll go away and come back with some worked-up detail, and then we'll consider that. And we've heard from at least one member, Deputy Moore, who voted for that in-principle work to be undertaken and has today said she has changed her mind and she doesn't support what's been put before us by the Health Minister, not the Home Affairs Minister. I think Deputy Curtis said that we have to support it because it was agreed in principle. No, he's shaking his head. That was the impression that I got. But my view is that it's exactly the time to reconsider, because we are a mature assembly and we know that we are able to reconsider previous decisions. We can do that today. We can emulate our youth assembly who voted against the notion of assisted dying. They voted against it. The younger generation. I'm not going to repeat the arguments, many and varied as they are, for and against assisted dying. My real concern is that our decision-making determines our future as a society. I think it was Deputy Doublé who said she wanted to humanise the debate. She used the word humanise. My view is that if we normalise the taking of a life, which is what we essentially would be doing by supporting this, we dehumanise our society. We dehumanise it. It becomes normal. It becomes normal to take a life. We heard from the Solicitor General yesterday about if anybody takes a life, if a medical practitioner in particular administers medication in a way intended to take a life, essentially that is murder. That is killing someone, that is murder. If we agree to assisted dying, it's a lovely phrase, isn't it? The person, assisted suicide, so the person who wants to commit suicide will be able to do that. But the person, if it is administered by a medical professional, they will be known as the, I had it somewhere, just bear with me, the practitioner administrator, I think that's somewhere. So the medical professional who administers the lethal medication essentially will be the state-sanctioned murderer, because that is what we will be doing. We will be sanctioning murder by the medical professional. It sounds so glib, but in fact, That is essentially what it is. Assisted dying, it rolls off the tongue. Assisted dying. And we won't be here to see the long-term effects and consequences on our society if we agree to the state-sanctioned murder. Just looking at my notes, euphemistically referred to as practitioner administration, lovely term, practitioner administration. I prefer to call it what it is, state-sanctioned murder. And Deputy Jeune said yesterday she'd lived in Belgium for a number of years, and I think she said that assisted dying has been legal there for about 20 years. And I wrote down accepted in Belgium. She said it's accepted in Belgium. 20 years is a very short time. We don't really know what impact it has had on society in Belgium. But what we do know from other jurisdictions is that it has become the norm, and it has crept gradually. We know in Canada it's become the norm. It started as only this group of people who are able to ask for assisted dying. I haven't got it all written down in front of me. I've read it, I've been to the meetings, I've heard everything. And then it creeps on to other groups and other groups. And, you know, they're looking at reducing the age limit in various jurisdictions. So we're looking now at children. I was looking at the children's rights impact assessment for this. And it's the longest one that I've seen for any proposition that's been lodged. It's really interesting the way it... Have we thought about the impact on the children, those remaining, of their loved ones deciding to end their life through assisted dying? I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned so far. I'm veering away from the notes that I've actually got written down here. So quite rightly, it started with the Constable of St Helier this morning. The Health Minister has been called upon to account to members and to the public why he has chosen this as a priority to bring forward in what really is a brief term of office, a couple of years left. And we await his response in his summing up. And no doubt he will give a sound and well-reasoned response. No doubt he will cover the costs of the officer time, law officers, legal advice to date, how much it has cost to bring this here today, notwithstanding the many thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of pounds it will cost to bring to fruition and to then implement assisted dying in Jersey. And how those costs outweigh funds being spent on other health services. Not least, of course, end-of-life care. I won't call it palliative care. I'll call it end-of-life care. And as someone who has recently, unfortunately, experienced the trauma of end-of-life care given at the hospital, I can assure the Minister firsthand that money must be spent immediately on providing, and let's turn to page 128 of his proposition, on providing practical and emotional support to the family of loved ones. So this is assisted death. Very keen for those who want an assisted death. The Minister wants to provide practical and emotional support to the person and to any family or loved ones who were present. That's laudable, absolutely laudable, and as it should be. But Minister, I must say to the Minister, at the moment, that should be being provided to family members who are facing the trauma of a loved one dying in the hospital in Jersey at the moment, and who are not provided with that by any means at all. First-hand experience, very raw, and absolutely real. That would be money well worth spent. So I repeat, my fear is that away from this chamber, away from our debates, the long-term consequences, if we approve this, are that we dehumanise everyone in our society. We normalise the taking of a life, and we therefore devalue it. But we're not here to devalue life. We are here to value it. That's our job. Otherwise, why would we be here? What have we put ourselves forward for as elected representatives? We are here to protect the vulnerable.
Conor, your time is 15 minutes is up.
Thank you, sir. I therefore urge members to reject this proposition, and I take the view that it is not a moment to be proud, as some members have said. I certainly would be proud to vote against this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Deputy Labby.
Thank you, sir. And I'm quite pleased to follow the last speaker because I'm going to stand here and speak for choice. I had a much longer speech to make today, even though I had not fully made up my mind about all aspects of the proposition before coming here. But after the very many good contributions which have been made, and which I won't repeat, I shall keep it short. And like others, I acknowledge and respect all the very many members of the public who've contacted me with their views, although I've not had the opportunity to respond to them all. But they are all valid, and like this debate, has been a good one. I believe one way of considering what is before us is to consider what we would want for ourselves. Would we want an end to pain and suffering, which may go over many weeks and months and even years? If the quality of my life was non-existent and I would never have the opportunity of getting better, why would I want to prolong that agony and suffering? Why would I be made to descend into an undignified, painful death? Personally, I would want to be surrounded by my family at home, and for them to be able to remember me content with my lot and at peace with the world. That is my choice, and what we have before us offers that. Now, I'm not in that position, and I've always been taught to never judge a man or woman until you've walked a mile in their moccasins. I do not have a terminal illness, and I do not live with unbearable suffering. I do, however, know and have known those who have and do now. Alan Dishma was a friend of mine. James Bedding, who featured on the TV this week, is also a friend. And my dearest colleague and friend, known to us all now, whose writing and courage and insight to life and death has been an inspiration to hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. All favour the options and choices we have before us, whether they are needed or not. The flip side is what I witnessed of my brother-in-law, who deteriorated so badly over 3 years and was made to live a life I would not have wished to live through and would not wish it on anyone. We have the option of offering a choice. You don't have to take it, but it might even bring comfort just knowing it's there if needed. The law has got to come back to this assembly and will be a place to scrutinise the safeguards, the governance issues, training and all the concerns which have been raised already to give us choice. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Thoughts of loss are difficult to bear, so always difficult to bear. Watching a loved one suffer can be deeply traumatic for family members, sir. I have respect for all views and beliefs. I value life, sir. I believe every member in this assembly values life. We don't have a society, and whatever we decide today, I don't think we will have a society that wants to help people to die. We want to help people to live, sir, but we want to give people a choice. And I have, for me, sir, it's about my own views, thoughts, opinions, deep thoughts, careful consideration, my own personal experiences, and the protection of an individual's autonomy and the right to choose how they end their journey. And my personal experiences relate to both of my parents, who suffered long illnesses, sir, and both, I know, would have been relieved to have had this choice. They both, on their deathbeds, asked their sons to help them, and we couldn't. Assisted dying, sir, empowers individuals to make decisions about their own lives and deaths. For many patients with terminal illnesses, the end stages can involve significant pain, discomfort, and a decline in quality of life, despite the very best palliative care. The options presented in the Assembly to the Assembly, sir, offers an option to escape intolerable suffering and provides a sense of relief and peace both for the patients and their families. Knowing that they have the option of assisted dying can provide psychological comfort to terminally ill patients. The sense of control of being in one's ultimate destiny, so can alleviate anxiety and fear about the future, helping them and their loved ones to cope better with the diagnosis or unbearable pain and suffering situation, to enjoy as best as possible their remaining time more fully. Assisted dying can shorten this period of intense suffering, reducing the emotional and psychological burden on families and allowing them to focus on meaningful goodbyes rather than prolonged decline. In cases where suffering and pain cannot be effectively managed by conventional means, sir, the primary goal of medicine is to alleviate suffering. The key to the introduction of assisted dying in Jersey will be, sir, the safeguards we put in place in legislation. And the issue, sir, of safeguards has been raised in the majority of correspondence I think we have all received, and rightly is and must be a key component of the solution, sir. It's a key component of the proposition, and it's been a key component of the debate, and must be part of the foundations of any legislation. The Solicitor General has confirmed to the Assembly that the proposals contain robust safeguards which provide for compliance with our human rights obligations. The British Medical Association has recently issued a public statement setting out how assisted dying services should be organised and delivered to protect and safeguard both the public, sir, and medical professionals. They highlight Jersey's proposals as an example of how to achieve this. They do not reference any other jurisdiction, sir, just Jersey, and we should take confidence from that. We must also maintain our commitment to drive up standards of palliative and end-of-life care services. Some members support the principles of Route 2, but are concerned about whether it can be delivered safely, so with the right safeguards. And members have expressed concerns and have had long and deep deliberations over other aspects of the law, so whatever that will look like. But once we have the draft law before us, we can remove Route 2 at that point if necessary, if we feel it is the right thing to do at the time once we have the detailed legislation in front of us. And officers will be asked to ensure that the draft law can be readily amended, sir, if the Assembly is so minded. To summarise, assisted dying offers significant benefits in terms of personal autonomy, freedom of choice, relief from suffering, psychological comfort, and compassionate care. It is in our power to make a decision today, sir, that will reduce prolonged pain for individuals and grief for their families. I very much, sir, believe that the availability of assisted dying will also serve as an incentive for the ongoing evolution of palliative care services and further enhancement in healthcare. I hope it encourages the development of better pain management techniques, emotional support, and holistic care that will alleviate suffering and enhance quality of life for those facing terminal illness, sir, who decide not to follow this option, sir. The option of assisted dying offers individuals the ability to exercise their choice, retain their dignity, and alleviate the emotional burden in themselves, sir, and their loved ones. And if the Assembly approves the proposition today, we can offer a compassionate and humane choice to islanders facing unimaginable pain. And in doing so, sir, we can acknowledge the depth of human suffering and provide individuals with a compassionate and dignified way to end their journey. It is a credit, sir, to the Assembly and to everyone who has contributed that we have been able to have a respectful, considerate and sensitive debate. And I would like to express appreciation, sir, for the thoughtful preparation and careful articulation of views expressed by members. After listening to the debate and listening carefully to the views, opinions, concerns, and the supportive views and comments of Islanders, sir, and in relation to my own personal experiences, beliefs, and choices, I will be supporting the proposition in its entirety. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Conor Thompson-Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I stand here today, sir, as an individual unqualified in medical matters, but with the benefit of some of life's experiences under my belt. I have empathy, like all of us here, for those in pain in any shape or form, and to those individuals known and mentioned by members today. We have been, sir, what I might describe as pummeled by the government department tasked with developing the proposed legislation. The effort by the very capable team involved must be unprecedented, and whilst an extremely serious matter, it does seem to me disproportionate and leaves me questioning why we seem to be having this forced upon us. I do feel, sir, that this should have been the subject of a referendum, given the clear split in views on the matter. That may yet come, of course. The statistics provided based on polls don't seem to me to be the right approach for a matter of this gravity, and I'm not a supporter of the citizens' panel concept. We here are the democratic representatives of the people, sir, and as such should be making the fundamental decisions necessary without undue coercion. Other speakers, sir, have mentioned the cost of the proposed model given the estimated numbers involved, and one wonders whether it wouldn't be better putting funds into better care and the health service as a whole. It's easy to let emotion take charge, but at the risk of being insensitive, the reality is that this will be a niche, expensive market, and I would rather see the funding directed to the needs of those with dementia, specialist palliative care and other services that bring life and hope to our island community. There's much psychology involved with any individual who might be arriving at the end of their lives for a variety of reasons. I was interested to read a letter from a consultant psychologist last night indicating the risks involved and urging me not to support the proposition. The medical profession itself appears split, and I must say that without unanimity from them as professionals, I feel uncomfortable in giving the proposition support. I am, sir, on the management committee of a care home, and the question has come up as to what their policy might be. There is a great risk that the home, in aligning itself to the proposed policy, will do nothing for its reputation, and given it as a commercial operation, this is a matter that cannot be overlooked. We all have personal experience of death in our families, or most of us, and without wishing to sound trite, it is part of life's rich pattern, which some of us don't have to deal with until later in life, even if at all. The effect on families of a death is not insignificant, and some will take years to overcome the traumatic experience which so many of us are just not equipped to deal with. A family experience of my own, sir, involved an uncle who sadly contracted Parkinson's disease. He ended up in a home where he finally died after having been attended by my aunt on a daily basis. The point of this reference is that my father, who was a few years older and to a degree disabled, positively avoided my aunt thereafter, as he considered she was complicit in my uncle's demise and that he himself might potentially be at risk. Now, whether she was or was not complicit, I do not know, but we mustn't ignore the fact that there will be unintended consequences to families to the proposition being supported today. I would say, sir, that incident took place in Belgium where, as we've heard, the legal framework is different. In addition, sir, my experience is that the mindset of, say, a 50 or 60-year-old person is quite different to that of an 80 or 90-year-old, particularly regarding life and death. And I would emphasize the point that minds can change. Loss of dignity and suffering is something that none of us can condone, but I don't believe that my morals and ethics allow me to support assisted dying proposals at this time. I must take this opportunity, sir, before concluding, to thank all those, like others, who've taken the time to get in contact directly or through the government portal. I appreciate all the comments passed on, which have certainly educated me on the subject and have helped inform my decision. The weight of opinion I've received, sir, has been against my supporting the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Carter. Dr. Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I will keep my speech short as I don't want to repeat the arguments that have already been made. But I do stand in support of the principle of assisted dying because I do believe that people should have the right to choose a dignified death. This is a matter of conscience for us all, and I know that we've all searched deeply in coming to our own conclusions about this. This isn't around decisions of political parties or partisan nature. This is something that we're all looking at as individuals. And it's been interesting for me to hear and learn from everybody in the Assembly today. And I have to say, everything's been incredibly helpful in helping me come to my own conclusion, because when I came in to the Chamber on Tuesday, I knew where I stood on Route 1, but I did have reservations around Route 2 for very many of the reasons that have been discussed previously within this debate. I was mindful of the ethical review, and also that it might be more difficult possibly to find professionals prepared to deliver Route 2 as well. I didn't want that to get in the way potentially of being able to deliver Route 1 in a timely fashion, because I know people are waiting for that to be done. A lot has been talked about potentially people with disabilities or older people feeling that they may be pushed to choose Route 2. But I have to bring myself back to the wording of the proposition and the decisions before us, because in the wording that it is in front of us, it refers to an incurable physical medical condition that is giving rise to unbearable suffering and cannot be alleviated in a manner the person deems to be tolerable. There is no mention of either disability or age within those paragraphs that we're agreeing. So I have to then take myself to the point of unbearable suffering and whether I consider it appropriate to offer as an option the ability for somebody to choose their own death in that circumstance. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that circumstance. And I'm coming to the conclusion that actually we do have the right type of safeguards. I'm very comforted to hear the chair of the scrutiny panel around the work that scrutiny has done. And I know that we're part of the way through what is actually a longer road. There is much more work to be done. This is just another step along the way. So at this point in time, I will be supporting both Route 1 and Route 2. One thing I would like to potentially ask the Health Minister to consider is that during this process ongoing, should both routes be adopted today, that if it looks as if the complexities around delivering Route 2 and the legislation around Route 2 mean that it would prolong the legislation and the delivery of Route 1, that potentially there might be an option in the future to bring Route 1 back to the Assembly prior to the legislation on Route 2. This has been an incredibly difficult debate for us all, and that's where I stand and how I will be voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And most people will know nowadays that I try and get my contributions to this chamber as short as possible. And so what I have in front of me today are 3 words, 3 key words, I believe. First is choice. And what I personally take from that is that if this chamber decides against what is proposed, then they will be taking away from my choice, from my ability to choose, should I ever be in this situation. And that applies not just to me, and I feel as if it's quite personal, but to all of us and everyone out there. absolutely key that you don't take away my choice. A choice to die with dignity. That's the second key word. Dignified death is to be avoided, I believe, at all cost. And that takes us on to the third word, which is autonomy. The autonomy of choosing the when and the where and the how of my death. And those three words, absolutely key. But I was quite disappointed to see what happened to some of the contributors to this debate, in that they relied not on matters of conscience necessarily, or matters of fact, but on throwing into the argument the word doubt, for example. Doubt this, doubt that. Ooh, doubt that undermines the case, no matter how well it's been made. Just put it in the argument and people start thinking twice. Not for factual reasons, but, that question, is that true? So doubt is one word undermining what we're talking about today. And slippery slope arguments, again, wonderful, wonderful tools in which to undermine, not to deal with their argument, but to undermine the central argument of a particular issue. And then the third way not to deal with the argument, but to undermine it. Let's start talking about the lack of investment in health, which has occurred over the past decade, at least, and start saying, yes, but we can't do that yet, and we don't do that yet, and we can't afford this yet, so we can't possibly go for the option that's in front of you. Again, undermining, insidious undermining, not of the argument, but of the case. And that's where I am. In a position where I believe my choice, my dignity and my autonomy are being undermined by some cheap, I will say cheap, debating tactics. And that shouldn't be happening. We should be taking this issue particularly serious and dealing with the arguments and the involvement rather than otherwise. And there I'll stop.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ozef.
Thank you, sir. I speak with a heavy sense of duty and responsibility like most members, and I would like to ask members for their forgiveness for my recent absence from the Assembly due to my own private medical matters. I am grateful for the respect that has been spoken about during this debate for the rights of privacy that is afforded to everybody in periods of ill health. All aspects of health right towards the end. And I'm fortunate to be one of the lucky ones. And I hope to be back in the Assembly for full-time duties in the very near future. Members, sir, will know that in the past year, I, in my personal position, have experienced great loss, the loss of loved ones. A dear friend who died a week before my husband suddenly died. I lost a father figure of cancer, and now coming to terms with the departure of another friend imminently. Those experiences, like all members, have, of course, informed my view. I think we all have a view that we regard life as a precious gift and the importance of doing the right thing, even in the face of adversity. And I say adversity, sir, particularly when in the context of the use of certain language, evocative words have been used, whenever I hear evocative words, so I try and translate them. And in an earlier remark from a member, I was trying to get the Jersey French word for death, and there was a number of interesting ditons, phrases used for death. I would urge members to not use evocative language that can mean one thing to one and one thing to another. So I would, if I may, like to commend the Chair and members of the scrutiny panel for the comprehensive work that they have done in this area on our behalf, and for particularly those of us who have not been able to spend the time on the detailed forensic analysis of the proposition that is before us. I would also recognise and thank the Health Minister and the previous Health Minister and the previous Health Minister beforehand and their officials, because I know that this work and this proposition before us has been the subject of painstaking, detailed, forensic work from many of us, including, may I say, the law officers who have a responsibility to advise on the law now and as it shall be, or potentially could be. The journey that has led us to the debate today has been a fairly lengthy one. And as societies always evolve and discussions, we are a debating chamber, and I think the contributions of all members have been heartfelt. We all go to the public and seek their mandate to serve them because we believe in doing a work that is improving, that is helping people in their lives. We do not come to the Assembly with a desire to end life. Life is precious, and that is why the Attorney General has rightly stated in his remarks yesterday that the involvement of the bringing to the end of life is one of the most serious crimes that our statute, our law has. The opposite is also the case, is that those that are involved in the prevention, in the improvement of life, are some of the most celebrated individuals that one can think about. Sir, as we consider the topic of the immense subject of assisted dying, I am reminded of the individuals who have touched my own life and the lives of others with their courage and dignity in the face of their own challenges and illnesses. Their stories, what they have taught me, what they spoke to me about, has given me inspiration to live life each day to the fullest and to do the right thing, even in difficult circumstances. And we have one of those as elected members today. I call to mind in particular, sir, the award by the bailiff of a medal to the CEO of Jersey's Overseas Aid, who has been referred to by the Minister of International Development. His struggle on his journey towards death. Dedicating life to good things is fantastic, and that's what we are here to do in all aspects of life. And there is one certainty, that we will all face death. And what a brilliant way of describing life in saying that it is a canvas, and there are certain people, individuals, and that particular individual will play a very important part on the canvas of whatever my life will bring. I wish to also refer to Alain Duchemin, who was, for me, a lifelong friend. From the age of 9, where I visited him in the Jersey General Hospital when he had pancreatitis, a very, very difficult and painful condition that isn't terminal, but it is incredibly difficult. and towards, I fast moved to the end of his life, where I was privileged to be with him for the last night and to spend time with him and speak to the extent that he was able to. I think I was the last friend, the last close person to be with him before he died. He died at Jersey Hospice, as he recalled it, the Shangri-La hotel on Montcontour. He never thought that there was a place which such brilliant care would be found. But it was there, and it was brilliant. And I never thought I would be there, because it was the place that fiscal stimulus funding put forward, which underlines the importance of the public contribution and funding of palliative care. I speak of Alan's experience because he knew he was going to die. Despite learned second opinions from expert consultants in Jersey and London, across the land of the United Kingdom, I visited hospitals with him, and he sought experts in curative options, including various trials that were to some extent limited because, sadly, of the inevitability of the challenges of COVID. As I reflect on what he said, and he gave courageous testimony in public to the scrutiny panel who was considering assisted dying, and he asked them, and he would want me as an elected member, who wasn't an elected member at the time, to use my voice in this assembly to explain why the appropriate thing to do, in my opinion, would be to allow individuals such as Alan Duchemin the right to have their death at a time of their choosing. As many other members have rightly said, it is the ability to think that you can end your life which is incredibly important in the journey of life towards death. And if I could bottle even 50% of the time that was spent on him planning what he was going to do anyway, that would be life that he could have lived even better, because he wanted to live and he wanted to make life matter. And the work that he did, and so many other people do in the final stages of their life, is so important. We see that in time. We shall reflect on the observations, the essays, the teaching that we've been given by the CEO of Jersey Overseas Aid. I believe that the current law regarding assisted dying is unfair. It denies people who are facing a certain death of the right to choose and to control their own life decisions, and it forces them to have unnecessary suffering, suffering which no one would wish to ask anybody to live through. As a non-Catholic, I have changed my mind in relation to that issue. I believe that the States Assembly, we have the ability to legislate, we have the ability to make choices. I think that Jersey has done an exemplar work in terms of the report and all the safeguards that have been, at least at this stage, summarised, but clearly set out to put those safeguards in place. The evidence is that from other countries, assisted dying remains a relatively small percentage of total deaths, and many individuals who choose it do not ultimately use the option, but they find huge comfort, and of course mental illness is now much better understood. They find huge comfort and have huge comfort in knowing that it could be available. The consequences of inaction on this issue is, I believe, a serious matter. It is dire for the people that are dying, and it is dire for those that are around them. We have today the opportunity to make a positive, life-changing change in the positive way that aligns with many of the values that we have heard from members of our community. And I thank all those who have written, and respecting their views, it is, as other members have said, it is the right to choose. It is not a compulsion. And in terms of I don't like the Route 1 terminology, sir, but in terms of those individuals who know that they face with a certain end of life in that Route 1 category, which may itself change, but as experts will inform people, they have the right to choose. They have the right to dignity, and they have the right to accelerate their own death. And they have the right also to not put those around them in the impossible position of looking after them and doing what they ask. So I ask members to kindly consider the voices of those terminally ill people and their loved ones who have advocated and who advocate around the world. And some jurisdictions have responded, and they have that right. I want to move also into a situation, and fully respecting the juxtaposition that the Minister has in relation to being the Health Minister, who is primarily responsible for making people better, improving people, and we have work to do, huge work to do in that in Jersey. For me, it is a parallel issue that should be now progressed, certainly in relation to option Route 1, the work to improve our health system, which is not as what we would be, I think, proud of for all the reasons that members have discussed and know about, and we will be discussing in the next months of this term of office. I want to put an emphasis on improving health outcomes, mental health outcomes, and I ask members to move forward with equal courage, with equal determination on the issue that a small but important minority of individuals who are facing a certain death, that they deserve the option to, as Alain Duchemin said, to have the choice of a death at a time of his choosing. In relation to Route 2, I believe, as one previous speaker said, and I would welcome the Minister's summing up as to the issue of the length of time that will take to deal with versus Route 1. And I thank
Deputy, your time is up. Your 15 minutes is up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. So much has already been said, and I had contemplated whether there was anything for me to add. I'd particularly like to say that Deputy Catherine Curtis's very excellent speech summed up my own position very, very well, particularly around the thought process and the personal challenges around the Route 2. But as today has gone on, I have decided that there is something I want to add, and it's a point around language. And we've heard language around Route 1 and Route 2 and what they should or could be called. And I think this has been alluded to, but actually not really spelt out. And so the point I want to make is that assisted dying is not the same as suicide. And I'm really pleased that the proposition recognises that, and that efforts have been made by the officers who've put it together to make that really very clear. And at their public presentation, certainly the one that I was at, it was made very, very clear, and that had been done very much on purpose. And as we get towards the end of this debate, it's just something I would like to remind members of. So it is in our minds going forward, whatever the decision is today. As I think somebody said earlier today, suicide is often impulsive. It's a lonely and desperate act. I've heard it referred to as like acting on an impulse and driving at a very high speed in a moment of perhaps madness or chaos in one's own mind, and it resulting in a catastrophic crash. It's rarely a settled and informed decision. And we've heard what we're debating today referred to as suicide a number of times, and in the many emails and approaches that we've all received as well. And given we've heard so much about the right to choose and the rights of individuals during this debate, I don't intend to stand here and say that people have to speak in a certain way or that a certain language has to be used. But again, I say what I do in the hope of just providing perhaps an insight into the use of that language. And so I do that from a point of experience. My own family has recent experience of suicide. And not that I'm sure that no one really is in any doubt, but I can absolutely assure members that it has a devastating impact on families and on those left behind. You often hear about people's lives being touched by suicide, like you hear it, people's lives have been touched by cancer. And I think it's, that doesn't touch the sides quite literally, does it? We all know, as those who have faced cancer or terminal illnesses in other ways, devastating, I think, is probably the closest word that I can come to if we were looking for a single word. And Deputy Coles pointed out, when he referred to suicide earlier, that it actually impacts often more than just a family or friends or networks, and is felt very widely in a community, including by the emergency services, who often have to pick up some of those pieces. Now, members received an email in recent days, and there may have been more than one, which suggested that we could somehow be encouraging people to take their own lives via suicide if we were to allow assisted dying. And I'd just like to take issue with that and say that the evidence shows that just by talking about suicide in a community, it's now suggested by experts and that there is no evidence to say that puts ideas into people's heads or leads to more chance that people in a community will go on to take their own lives by suicide. And again, I say that from an area of experience, having carefully researched it and looked into it, because at some stage I need to talk to my own children about suicide. What it does lead to, experience of suicide, is of having a loved one who's taken their own lives in that way, is actually a greater increase of suicide of those loved ones around them. And that brings me on to the final point that I want to make, and that's around the families that are left behind in these circumstances. And I think it was Deputy Miles who said earlier, not everyone will agree with our decisions, even if they love us. And we've talked again a lot about autonomy and the rights of individuals to choose. But it's also my belief that the safeguards that we put in place as we talk about assisted dying should also consider the experiences of families and of those left behind. And the best way that I believe we can do that is by facilitating, protecting and allowing individuals to make those informed, supported and settled decisions. And doing that within a robust, well-governed and expertly staffed system. And I think, as Deputy Southern said shortly ago, and for those people to then experience a dignified death. Not all families will be at peace with the decisions, but the hope is that they will be able to take some comfort, at least, that it was their loved one's settled choice and the end was as dignified as it could be. So, to me, that is not suicide. And if this proposition is approved today, and we move forward to the next stage, then the language we continue to use is important. And I think it's important not just in the context of the law and the proposition that would come before this Assembly, but in how we talk about it within our community as well. And that's on both sides of the debate. We should be mindful, in my view, of potentially weaponising the use of the word suicide in objection to this debate. And it reminds me of the the way suicide is written in legal terms, and I think we saw from the Solicitor General and some others with legal experience using the word committed suicide, because that is still within the law, but actually it's not common practice that we use it. Certainly when I was a journalist, the charities, mental health charities, encouraged us not to use that phraseology because it was somehow implying the guilt and the criminal act and placing it upon those persons. Time have moved on since there, and I'm worried that by perpetuating the use of the word suicide in relation to assisted dying, we could actually be taking a backward step there. That's the end of all I really want to add, but I would just say that I think it's been a really excellent debate, and the contributions from members have been so thought-provoking and emotional and personal, but I've seen very many comments actually over the lunch break from people within our community saying what a huge amount of respect they have for the things they've heard in this assembly today, and that's not something you often hear about us, is it? So I think we should take some a moment to reflect on that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir, and thank Deputy Stevenson for her contribution as well. And I would also like to thank, as many people have, everyone who's contacted us. I'd like to thank officers and the 3 ministers who have been involved in this as well. Actually 4, because I had forgotten that it's the former Home Affairs Minister who brought this to the first debate. So 4 ministers have been involved in this so far as well, and I'd like to thank all of them for helping us do this in the right way. Sir, I really want to explain how I'm going to vote, really. I'm not seeking to persuade anybody. Obviously, since 2018, this has been a matter that's been on my mind, because this came up in the 2018 election, which was the first election that I stood in. And it was a matter that, certainly when I decided to stand for election, it wasn't on my radar as an issue, but it became an issue during that election. And so, as a result of that, we stand here today. And certainly so, I do believe, from the moral perspective, in the idea of choice of your own life, sir. And should I wish to end it, particularly if I have a terminal illness, 6 months to go, should I wish to end it, then I have huge sympathy with the view that I should be able to end it. That idea of personal choice undermines a great, not undermines, some may say it underlines a great deal of my own political thinking. But so I'm going to start with Route 2, which, again, I don't like the language of Route 1 and Route 2, but it's what we have. Route 2 is one that I can say up front I shall not be voting for. It's we have heard over the years, and certainly in the last few days, many people talk about the slippery slope. And I think Route 2 is the route which leads to that slope certainly fastest, because Route 2 is in itself subjective. There is nothing objective about the idea of unbearable suffering. And Route 2, because of that subjectivity, will almost certainly become expanded over time, sir. I believe that is the case. Laws, you know, when we talk about a slippery slope in terms of law, we talk about you start with one element, and it's small and focused, and over time it grows and grows. And I think one of the reasons for that is because what happens, in my view, is that people see one group who have something that they are excluded from because of the definitions of it, and essentially they say, look, I should also be able to benefit from that, whatever it is. I'm not just talking about assisted dying here. And so another group comes along and says, actually, that's, you know, I'm excluded under the current definitions. I believe I should have that. And that's how you end up on something that people refer to as that slippery slope. And indeed, Deputy Kovac referred to a story in the international media just last week, which I thought was an example of that in the Netherlands, whereby a 29-year-old girl had been granted permission to access assisted dying because she was had unbearable suffering due to her mental health issues. And for me, that is a place that I don't think we should go. But I do think that by embarking on Route 2, over the years, that is a place we are likely to end up. So for those reasons, I will not be voting for Route 2, sir. Route 1, which definitely aligns much more closely with my own kind of moral and political thinking, is problematic for me only in terms of where we are today in Jersey and in terms of our health services. And I think I subscribe strongly to the Councillor of St Helier's view here, and other people have mentioned it. And that is, we have a health service that needs significant investment and improvement in so many areas, including mental health, maternity, overall safety. And importantly for this, and I know palliative care is part of this, but also palliative care. And I believe it was in this assembly just a few weeks ago that questions were being asked about palliative care only being available 5 days a week. And, you know, it is against that backdrop that I sit there and I say, I am sorry, but until we have sorted out those issues, those services which are in desperate need of improvement, in desperate need of attention, to then put on another service, which in itself has to be perfect in the way it is delivered, I think is unfair to the health service, unfair to the practitioners there, but also unfair to the people of Jersey. It is also, in my view, human nature that when something is new, you give it greater attention, and when something has been around for a while, that attention fades away. And so I also am concerned that by placing a new service, that service will become prioritised. It will get the attention. The other services will get less attention. And that's really where I struggle with Route 1, because since I have sat in this assembly in 2018, it has been clear to me as a politician who has not in any way focused on health services, it is clear to me that our health service is in desperate need. And, you know, it was a few weeks ago, I had nurses, GPs and consultant doctors approach me as a member of the States who hasn't spoken much about health services, and they approached me to talk about their concerns about the health service. And it's because we are here today talking about a service which is about the end of life, the very end of life, the taking of life, that it has to be so perfect. You know, the opportunities for coercion have to be so few. The way the service is delivered has to be incredibly humane, has to be incredibly caring. And I even myself have experienced at times with my GPs, etc., times when I said, really? Is that the service I receive here, sir? And so is this the right time for Jersey to have this service, this assisted dying service placed on it? For all the moral correctness of it, is it practically achievable? Is it practically the right thing to do? Can we assure that focus here will not take from focus on other services within the health service, sir? And I know doctors, nurses, and all the auxiliary staff around them work so hard within our health service to give us everything that we need as patients. But we also know that it's not always working, sir. And the reasons are many, and I blame no one, and I point no finger at any particular reason. But what I do know is that the health service is in dire need. And I don't think that us placing this extra burden on it is going to help us achieve improvements where they're needed in the health service. In fact, I fear that it will distract from them. There's another element that I do wish to highlight, which is this issue, I don't think it's been mentioned, I apologise if it has, of institutional coercion. And actually, this is some way related to what we've seen with the Post Office in the UK, as just the way institutions can become inappropriate in the way they work with people. And actually, I'm not talking here about Jersey's health service. I'm talking here about issues around, you know, we obviously have private companies in regard to care homes, places like this. I am concerned that their own priorities with regard to flow-through of patients, with regard to revenues, etc., could end up leading to the position where assisted dying is suggested. And that worries me a great deal. And I'd like to see a great deal more work done on making sure that institutional coercion is avoided at all costs, and that safeguards are put in place to make sure that institutional coercion cannot really become a fact, because that would be the most awful thing if in decades' time there is some case in which an institution somewhere in this island is found to have been coercive in this way. That would be the most awful of situations, sir. And so I will stop there, sir, to say I shall not be voting for either part of this proposition, but for two very different reasons. Whilst Route 1 does fit my own moral thinking much more closely, I just don't believe Jersey's where it needs to be in terms of delivering this safely, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatable Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I feel compelled to, having listened to some very good speeches today. We've all read about it. We've heard from constituents on one side and the other, with both very compelling arguments in both directions. And for me, it comes down to my own moral compass, ethical standards, what I feel is right for our community. And I speak today as somebody whose life has been directly impacted by the loss of a very close family member through very unfortunate circumstances. But I also reflect on this when I used to visit my father for months upon months at Overdale. And on my way in, if somebody had offered me a syringe or a little phial of something or other to say, this will help to ease him on his way, could I have done that? Could I have administered that to my father? No, I couldn't. But if I wanted, was it easier to subcontract that to somebody else on my way out? There was a keypad there which had P and C on it. And I decided, well, I'll help him out here and I'll press P. Well, I'm afraid my moral compass would not have allowed me to press P, and I will be pressing C for both of these propositions of parts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatable. Conatable Greville.
Thank you, sir. I'll talk briefly about my own experience. I actually committed to this at a hustings 2 years ago and made a commitment to supporting a sister dying then. I was going to use 3 reasons, but one of them was very personal. I'm a man of a certain age whose parents, uncles and aunts are all in their 80s and 90s, and so I've had a great deal, unfortunately, of experience of it recently. A very close member of my family has also utilised the wonderful services of the Samaritans, very unfortunately more than once. So at that time, I actually spoke about 2 reasons. One of them has already been explained, and that is the Digitas route, which disturbed me greatly. I also mentioned the lyrics of a Hollies song that became a film, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Which to me at the time meant that we have wonderful companions in life, dogs, cats, horses, that we actually don't allow to suffer in their last few days because we take them to the vet and have them put down. Now, why as a species are we the only ones that have to suffer in our final moments? But I didn't go ahead and think about any other way forward at that time, but then I realised I needed to back this up by going to presentations that were offered that autumn, all of whom affirmed my opinion at the time, bar one. And the one exception, I'm sure everybody knows here, was the Canadian one, which frightened me in many ways and unfortunately has put me off voting for Route 2. Not only because of my own experiences and my own family experiences, but because what was said at that presentation. In the last weekend alone, sir, I utilised the wonderful services of the special assistants at both Southampton and Jersey airports, wonderful individuals, for a very close family member of mine, who unfortunately uses the word burden far too often. And that experience for her had made it even more so, and I really don't like hearing that word burden as it has been put in that context. So, sir, I won't be voting for Route 2 as I expected to at the outset because of those reasons, but I will be supporting Route 1, the terminal illness route. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatable. If there's any other members to speak, Conatable St. 1.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak like the Constable of Trinity, because most of what I was going to say has already been said, so I don't intend to go over all of that again. I'd like to thank everyone who's taken part in the debate today. Over the last 2 days, it's been excellent. There have been some fantastic contributions. I'd like to congratulate the Dean especially. I think his speech was excellent, and also an emotional speech from the Constable of St Lawrence, which must have been very difficult for her, bearing in mind her recent bereavement. So I'd just like to read from an email that I received from somebody, which I think is quite important. It says, "The right of life is so fundamental. It's the very first right protected by the Human Rights Jersey Law 2000. Everyone's right to life shall be protected by law. No one shall be deprived of this life intentionally, save in the execution of a sentence of a court following the conviction of a crime for which this penalty is provided by law." So the states of Jersey have a duty to protect citizens. Sanctioning the termination of life, even if it's perceived to be voluntary, contradicts this fundamental responsibility. I'm sure that Deputy Southern won't like me saying the slippery slope, but it is a slippery slope that could lead to devaluation of human life. The most significant risk of devaluation of life is in the elderly, disabled and vulnerable populations. They may be existing victims of discrimination, domestic abuse, and could be coerced or manipulated into choosing death by succumbing to duty to die, particularly the situations where they may feel like a burden on their families or society. So coercion is a form of duress and would negate an individual's ability to give valid consent. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin Tile. Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon the Minister to reply. Oh, no, Deputy Wilson, you wish to speak?
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
I'll keep it brief because I think, sir, most people have made the comments in relation to the points that I wanted to raise myself. But I'd like to start by thanking the officers that I had the privilege to work with in developing the foundations for these proposals, and also members of the Ethical Review Panel who I hope have provided some value to members in terms of their deliberations. And also to Deputy Helen Mile and Jonathan Renouf, who agreed to join me in forming an oversight group and to help with the checks and balances around what we eventually proposed through these proposals today. I also want to acknowledge with deep respect the many and varying views I too have received from parishioners, particularly those in St Clement and Islanders more generally. And I've been overwhelmed by the number of people who've contacted me to share their private experiences, which has been quite a humbling experience. I want to take a slightly different view if I could, because having been involved in developing the proposals, what I wanted to say is that I hope officers, Islanders and Assembly members have sufficient confidence and assurance that the work that was undertaken to generate these proposals has, so far as could be reasonably expected, avoided any undue influence or bias. If we do proceed to drafting legislation at this stage, the proposals reflect the best objective efforts we collectively made at the time to do no wrong. I make no apology for the time it's taken us to get to this point. It's been a hugely complex, emotional, ethical and technically challenging piece of work to develop. It's required a deep understanding gained by listening to, researching and working with many varying perspectives on the issue. It has required frequent analysis of the facts and information available, studious interpretation of complex professional, legal and ethical moral arguments, and it's involved challenging officers to bring further clarity and explanation to secure, to describe what an assisted dying service would look like in Jersey. As we've heard, the proposition lays bare the realities of what issues we're dealing with. autonomy, choice, morals, tolerance, rules, regulations, safety, harm, compassion, vulnerability, coercion, conscientious objection, and the need to resource and legislate for a policy of social change that passes the tests laid out in Deputy Morell's amendment to the original P95 proposition. I'd like to thank Deputy Morell for his amendment, which I used as a framework to navigate my work with officers and underpinned the reasons why I believe the ethical review of the proposals would add value. The reason for the ethical review may or may not have been obvious to people at the time, and I would like to thank Deputy Balash for bringing to the attention of the Assembly the importance of ethical consideration in this debate. I am concerned and disappointed to hear that the voice of health professionals who engage directly on ethical matters on a daily basis with patients have not been positively engaged in bringing their views forward. And in my view, we've missed an opportunity to hear this perspective as part of our discussion today. The BMA, however, have made the following statement worthy of consideration. Not all doctors, even experienced consultants, have the ability to do the complex, demanding work that would be necessary, and recruitment of those suitable to undertake this work is likely to be difficult. And the reason I raise this is because some of the conditions that we have got to establish will by no means be easy. On a personal and professional level, for fear of becoming overly emotional, I do not intend, to recount my experiences with family members or indeed my professional experience as a nurse caring for people in both physical and mental distress. We all have stories to tell, and I can even remember the first patient I cared for, a man called Samuel, who died in excruciating pain in a hospital bed with no family or friend around him. I am pleased that was not the experience that my own father had. Experiences shape values and beliefs. It is my view that people should have choice and control in their lives. They should have a right to choice and control to the very end, and that healthcare should be delivered with compassion, giving hope and enabling recovery and upholding the principles of do no harm. Overwhelmingly, the fear expressed by many is that we do not open the door to assisted dying in the way we are proposing, because their view is that it might lead to pressure being put on the Assembly to expand in other areas not previously contemplated, for example, mental illness in children. Whatever the views we hold about the right to individual choice and control, this is a real concern for people, and one we should not and cannot ignore when considering if these proposals are adequate. The route to an assisted death is described in two ways and is potentially interchangeable. So the safeguards do have to be robust enough to ensure there is sufficient to detect coercion early and guarantee that the service delivered is to the highest standard in both of the routes outlined. Objectively, the safeguards for Route 1 are good enough to avoid any expansion on the notion of unbearable suffering, because it draws a clear line in the sand and helps limit the scope of assisted dying and its ramifications. If we do proceed to law drafting, the proposals offer a compassionate response to those about to die as a way to alleviate their suffering, a view that was also supported by the views of the Ethical Review Panel. If we concede to the idea that people should be able to end their life under Route 2, there is no doubt the door will be open to a wide range of unintended consequences, and there is evidence that this is happening in other jurisdictions. It's hard to control, despite the assertion that there will be safeguards. I believe this is what the Ethical panel were alluding to when they suggested they would not recommend Route 2 in its current form. We all recognise unbearable suffering exists, but I think, as I heard from the Solicitor General, that getting to an agreed definition in law about what unbearable suffering is fraught with difficulty and complication, and therefore potentially open to abuse. I would have wished by now to see more in the proposals about how we will deal with the issue of suicide and suicide prevention. Suicide contagion is a real issue, so we need to be prepared that by promoting assisted dying as a service, it will have consequences. The evidence suggests that if we do proceed to legislation, we will potentially see an increase in the rate of suicide. I found a quote from Mr. Richard Hawkes, the Chief Exec of a disability organisation called Scope, previous Chief Exec. He asked the following question: why is it that when people who are not disabled want to commit suicide, we try to talk them out of it, but when a disabled person wants to commit suicide, we focus on how we can make that possible? We do need to think about some of these perspectives. These proposals will impact on the work of mental health services, and I have to admit this aspect of care delivery has been overlooked in these proposals. An unpalatable fact about healthcare delivery is that we cannot provide everything to all of the people all of the time, despite what we wish or desire for ourselves. We need to be clear and proportionate that we do not raise expectations in the context of what is going on in our health service today. Originally supportive of HCS being the provider under these proposals, if adopted, I've completely changed my mind on this. We do need to explore other delivery options more fully. The concern is not about process and procedure, which can be legislated for, but about the values and the attitudes we attach to the delivery and oversight of our healthcare system more generally. We are in the early stages of embedding the kind of oversight needed to ensure standards are upheld. And to be quite frank, we need to get serious about that if we're to see this kind of service develop under our health system. No longer do I want to hear indefensible use of public money or not needed at all as an excuse for improving governance in our health system. These proposals raise serious questions about our state of readiness for such an important piece of legislative change, and it is a central safeguard to these proposals. In his report, prepared for his amendment in 2021, Deputy Morell made the following statement: I retain strong reservations about the processes, systems and safeguards surrounding it and question whether Jersey is able to deliver these in a wholly appropriate and incorruptible manner. So in making our decisions today, can we be confident these proposals are agreeable, adequate, competent and enough? From my perspective, I believe the safeguards for Route 1 can be upheld on ethical, compassionate and legal grounds. But the overarching governance framework does not, in my view, provide the appropriate safeguard in which to deliver an assisted dying service. For Route 2, the proposals have not yet reached a level of maturity in terms of what is needed to ensure the state does no harm. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Sir, before I attempt to provide any form of summary, I'd just like to take the opportunity to say a few words of thanks. Firstly, to all members of this Assembly. As always in debates of this delicate nature, speeches have been well considered and very respectful. I'd also like to thank all healthcare professionals that have contributed, everyone in the community that's taken part in the consultation process, and everyone that's engaged in the democratic process of lobbying, whether for or against the proposition. I'm also grateful to members for enduring my introduction to the debate. With hindsight, it may have been a bit too long, but I hope it provided a proper context for the difficult issue under discussion. And mercifully, sir, my closing speech will be considerably shorter. Last but by no means least, I'd like to offer my sincere thanks to the two senior policy officers who've worked tirelessly and professionally on this proposition for nearly 3 years. So whichever way members intend to vote today, and whatever the outcome, I think we can all agree that these highly motivated individuals have produced a framework for what can rightly be described as a world-class assisted dying service, and I think we owe them a debt of gratitude, sir. Moving to the debate itself, we've heard a wide range of differing views from all sides of this complex subject. But given that the entire issue is one that involves deep-rooted, indeed foundational beliefs, I feel there's little to be gained by passing particular comment on any of them. I would, however, make one general exception, and that's to acknowledge that some very constructive suggestions have been made in relation to how matters might be taken forward from here. I'd just like to confirm that all of them have been heard, noted, and they'll form part of the ongoing process in the event that the vote this afternoon takes us in that direction. In addition to this, I'd like to add my personal assurance that for as long as I continue to enjoy the confidence of the Assembly, I give my word that the quality of approach that's been taken to date will continue throughout. And I'm unable to offer any more than that, sir. So I must now mention money, the health service, and priorities, all of which are vitally important and all present something of a challenge for me in my current post. I don't want to detract in any way from the core issue under debate, but I must address suggestions that the introduction of this service will degrade palliative care and detract from the stabilisation and improvement of our health service. So members certainly haven't missed the fact that I frequently say that nothing happens without money. And that, sir, is an inescapable fact. It would be entirely inappropriate for me to launch into a detailed explanation of my intentions regarding health funding. But I've also indicated in the recent past that I intend to come back to the Assembly to explain exactly where we are financially and, subject to Council of Ministers' backing, make recommendations for what needs to be done going forward. Health requires increased funding, certainly in the short term, and to an extent I think it will do going forward. I have separate ideas for ill health prevention and separate ideas for funding that too. To me, the problem of funding has been ignored for too long. Ultimately, however, the quality of service and the commitment we have to it will rest with this Assembly. But, sir, all of that is for another day. Returning more directly to assisted dying, I'd like to address the concerns of the pain that will be experienced in the event that something might go wrong if the service is introduced. Well, we must accept that there are no absolute guarantees, even though the system is exceptionally thorough. However, against this, we really ought to consider the pain that will be endured if we don't introduce the service. And here we do have some guarantees, sir. We can guarantee that the painful deaths that can't be properly managed with palliative care will continue to go on quietly, out of sight and without fanfare, just as they do now. And in a civilised society, that cannot be right. And here, like others, I speak with a little authority. I'd rather wanted to avoid mention of this, but when I watched my own father die, privately and very painfully from pancreatic cancer, I would have struggled to sit by his bedside and listen to someone explaining how important it was for him to endure all the pain that he did, simply to satisfy their beliefs or concerns about what might have gone wrong if he were to have opted for an early release. It would have been especially galling, given that he'd always asked me to promise that I wouldn't leave him to suffer should he find himself in that precise situation. And it troubles me to this day, sir, that I let him down. And the situation wasn't for lack of palliative care. Indeed, we were able to access a new arrangement with Southampton Hospital that allowed my father to have morphine at a level above that normally allowed. Being a strong individual, the net result was that he died slowly of dehydration, the morphine having rendered him unable to swallow without choking, try as he did. So I wasn't thinking about value for money at the time, and I struggle to find consolation now in thinking that his miserable death could be justified on the basis of healthcare priority. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to return to the fact that we now have at our disposal a truly excellent framework for the development of an assisted dying service that the majority of Irelanders appear to want. All the evidence points to the fact that most people want choice, dignity, and autonomy. So, given the many opportunities that we've had to study the details, we all know that the service would have very robust safeguards, the very robust safeguards required to deliver that. As I said in my introductory speech, if a malintent was looking to inherit early, the last avenue they would pursue would be Jersey's assisted dying service. So, sir, all that brings me appropriately, I think, to my final comment. Sir, I'd like to leave the Assembly with the same question as was asked by the Dean as he closed his speech. In what sort of society do we want to live? I thank you, sir, and call for the appel.
Thank you, Minister. And to confirm, you're asking for separate votes on each of the 5 sub-paragraphs in your proposition. Minister, to confirm, you're asking for 5 separate votes on each sub-paragraph of your proposition. That's right, isn't it?
Apologies, sir. Yes, indeed I am.
Yes, thank you very much. So the greffier will summarise the effect of each sub-paragraph before the vote to remind any members who don't have it in front of them what each paragraph says. I invite members to return to their seats. I invite the greffier to summarise the effect of paragraph A of the proposition before opening the voting.
So paragraph A provides a mandate to progress to law drafting and sets out the core eligibility criteria, and it's taken alongside the appendix, which sets out essential provisions and safeguards and the associated arrangements for regulation and oversight.
I ask the greffier to open the voting on sub-paragraph A of the proposition. All members have cast their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting on sub-paragraph A, which has been adopted. 31 votes for, 15 votes cont, and no abstentions. We now move on to B, which the greffier will summarise.
So paragraph B is a vote for assisted dying for those with a terminal illness referred to as Route 1.
By the greffier to open the voting. All members have now cast their votes. I invite the greffier to close the voting. I announce that B has been adopted. 32 votes for, 14 votes cont, and no abstentions.
Can I ask for the votes to be read out on both sides?
It's going to take a wee bit longer because I just clicked to go to the next vote. So those voting contre, the connotabs of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Bralard and Trinity, St Juan and St Saviour, and deputies Morale, Gorst, Moore, Balash, Wall, Howell, Kovac, Barbara Ward, and those voting for, the Conotabs of St Peter, St Martin, St John, St Clement and Grouville and St Mary, Deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Dublay, Ayer, Ward, Owls, Gardner, Farnham, Coles, Porray, Miles, Scott, Reniff, Curtis, Feltham, Shern, Miller, Binney, Ferry, Ward, Wilson, Stevenson, Andrews, and online Deputies Osoph and Deputy Rose Binney.
We now move to paragraph C of the proposition, which the greffier will summarise.
Paragraph C is a vote for assisted dying for those with unbearable suffering who may or may not have a terminal illness, referred to as Route 2.
I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have cast their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part C has been rejected. 19 votes pour, 27 votes contre, and no objections.
Can we have the names, please?
So those voting contre, the Conotabs of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brallard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, Rouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Morale, Gardner, Gorst, Moore, Valash, War, Reniff, Curtis, Miller, Howell, Ferry, Kovac, Curtis, Ward, Wilson, Stevenson and Andrews. And those voting pour, the Conotabs of St John and St Clement, and Deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Dublay, Ayer, Ward, Elves, Farnham, Coles, Porray, Miles, Scott, Feltham, Shern and Binney, and Deputies Osoph and Rose Binney online.
So can I just confirm that the ward, the second one pour was me, with Deputy Rob Ward. There's just two wards, thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. And we now move on to paragraph D of the proposition, which the greffier will summarise.
Paragraph D, as amended, provides the right for any person to refuse to participate in an assisted death.
I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that that has been adopted. 45 votes pour, 1 vote contre.
The Conotab of St One voted contre.
I'll move to subparagraph E and invite the greffier to summarise the effect of E.
Paragraph E sets out the requirement for minimum timeframes in the process.
I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And part E has been adopted. 44 votes pour, 1 vote contra and 1 abstention. Yes.
Deputy Barbara Ward voted contre and Deputy Kovac abstained.
That concludes that debate. We now move on to reappointment of Jersey Consumer Council Chair, lodged by the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. the main respondent being the chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I invite the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to refer to their Act dated 2nd of February 2011 regarding the Jersey Consumer Council and, in accordance with paragraph B2 of Jersey Consumer Council Future Mandate of P182 of 2010, to approve the reappointment of Mr. Carl Walker as chairman of the Jersey Consumer Council for a further term of 3 years with effect from 14th of April 2024.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm pleased to propose to the Assembly the reappointment of Mr. Carl Walker as chair of the Jersey Consumer Council. This organisation has weathered many challenges in recent years, including the COVID-19 pandemic, a significant rise in inflation and the resultant cost of living crisis. This in itself led to a number of projects being put on hold as the Consumer Council had to react to the urgent challenges. But the Consumer Council now operates with 2 new part-time officers, which allows the Council to pursue a number of pieces of work which had previously been delayed. And it is for that reason that I am proposing that we reappoint Mr. Walker for another 3 years. Amongst these pieces of work are a consumer fair, youth council member representation and promotion of younger consumer concerns, as well as additional work on ongoing issues, including ATOL, the travel bond protection, insurance for islanders and businesses, and an improved price comparison service. So members will be aware that the Consumer Council has recently updated its constitution to expand its remit to promoting the interests and rights of young people as consumers, and to remove the upper limit on the number of volunteers of the Jersey Consumer Council. It has also been changed to allow the chair to stand for another 3 years. I do hope that the Consumer Council will be able to build on its work that Mr. Walker has so clearly undertaken and worked so hard to undertake, and that he and the Council will be given the opportunity to see through these important projects. Sir, I propose the proposition.
Thank you very much. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Yes. Dario.
Thanks. I'm happy if the Chief Minister wants to go first, but I'm
Do you want
happy
to go
to
first,
speak.
Chief Minister?
No, thank you, sir.
All right,
I'd
you're
better
first
wait and
then.
see what he
You're
says.
both very polite today.
We're obviously very polite after the debate we've had. So this probably seems like a fairly straightforward reappointment, but as the chair of the scrutiny panel to which this falls, I do have 1 or 2 comments to make on behalf of the panel. It's something we've considered. And it's simply to say that when we received this, we noted that there were a number of changes being made, most of which, once we had got the answers to, we were satisfied with, that they made sense. But one thing I think is worth flagging up to the Assembly is the fact that in order for this reappointment to be made, as the Minister did allude to, it was necessary to change the policy, if you like, or that went around the tenure of the chair, because it had been up until that point limited to 6 years, and the current incumbent had reached the end of that 6-year period. So we as a panel did ask what the rationale was for having a 6-year period in the first place if it was simply to be extended for another 3 years. Because I presume that when one puts terms in place, and this isn't something that's limited to this particular role, you find it in all sorts of committees that exist around the island. I seem to recall from my days on the Arts Centre Committee that they have lengths of service that a particular position holder, the chair or the treasurer, can remain in office for. And that's done deliberately, presumably, to get some fresh ideas and fresh thinking in place. If it's the case that this was changed simply to allow the current incumbent to stay in position, one has to question why there's a maximum length of time at all. And I suppose looking ahead to 3 years' time, what would happen if the current incumbent is presumably doing a good job and wants to stay in the position? Would we simply abolish the 9 years and say that he can carry on ad infinitum or until he gets bored or retires from that position? So this very much is not talking about whether the individual is competent to be able to do that position, but it does beg the question about why we would put time restrictions in place in the first place if we're simply going to rip them up. It does also then beg the question as to whether or not a procedure was followed for other potential candidates to put themselves forward, which would seem potentially desirable. So if you know, for example, that the term of office is coming to an end, one might expect for an open and transparent process for other individuals to apply for this position and for the best person to be chosen on merit. So I'd be interested to know if any of that has happened, if any of that can happen under the current system. I don't think it can, because this is simply an automatic rubber stamping and reappointment, and some reassurances about what would happen in 3 years' time if indeed the individual who we can name, but I don't need to name him, wants to go for that job. I clarify that probably what I'm going to do for this appointment is to abstain on it, and that's no reflection on the person in the current role, and I don't expect necessarily anyone else to do that, or anyone even on the panel to do that. But I think from my position, I would like to keep that objectivity when looking at this and potentially reviewing it in the next few years. But I do wish the Consumer Council and the individual all the best for the next 3 years if indeed he does get reappointed. I think the Consumer Council does some really vital work in Jersey, especially given the size of Jersey, given the fact that the cost of living is a perennial issue, and the fact that we probably have quite a lot of monopolies operating in the island. I make no criticism of that, but often that's the nature of being a small island. So I think they've got their work cut out, and I wish them all the best for that.
Thank you, Deputy. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'll let the Minister deal with the time question that Deputy Teddy asked in his summing up. I'm sure he's prepared for that, sir. And I would certainly agree with the maximum, in principle, 9-year limit. So I just wanted to say that I worked with Mr. Walker, and I was carrying out the role that Deputy Morales is now carrying out, and I find him to be of excellent character. So the work he was doing was interrupted quite significantly during the COVID pandemic, and since then we've just seen some momentum building again. The work that the Consumer Council are doing is going to be particularly important in highlighting competition issues, especially now in an area when we're in times of high inflation. So I just wanted to endorse the appointment wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon the Minister.
Yes, please, sir.
Oh, yes, Deputy.
Yes, please, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I welcome the reappointment of Mr. Walker, and I was heartened to hear the comments of the Chair of the Scrutiny Panel and the Chief Minister, and would just like members will recall a strong interest by certain members, one me being myself, of the importance of advocacy for consumer rights, in particularly the work of promoting fair competition in what is, as the Chief Minister says, is an island marketplace. And also, if the Minister could kindly, in his summing up, reinforce, for the avoidance of any doubt, that I take on board and fully support, of course, the issues of children and the youth membership. That's great. But I would also wish the Minister to kindly say that he does see that Jersey's Consumer Council does have, at the moment it's not a statutory right, but a right to engage and an obligation to engage actively for the rights of consumers in this particularly difficult and ongoing time of high and rising cost of living and inflation, on a statistic that we can't directly compare because we don't measure the same level as everywhere else in the world. The role of the Consumer Council can monitor competition in the marketplace. They're well placed, better than the regulator, to identify anti-competitive practices such as price fixing, cartel behaviour, and they can keep a close eye on the market dynamics, and they can speak out in a way that other organisations can't. And the chairman has so far done that. And I would like the public, the Minister is minded to say so, the public support that the chairman and the council has in undertaking that vital work, which seems to me to be an increasing concern in Jersey as we see a contracting marketplace. I know barriers to business are a difficulty, but we are seeing a widening of the inflation rate in Jersey compared to that of our neighbours, and that means we're eroding the cost of the Jersey pound. So providing the Consumer Council, it doesn't have a statutory role. It could do, but their role is absolutely vital in competition policy enforcement, in advocacy, and they can play a very significant role in, I think it's not clear from the Common Strategic Policy quite where which is why I abstained, I'm not quite clear as where the real effort is going to be on one of the issues of the most serious public concern that we have, that is cutting across all society groups, all sectors, as we see I don't want to use an emotive word, but the word of the very destructive situation of inflation eroding the real value of the pound in our pockets and the pound that people have, and that then in turn increases government spending and it limits consumer choices and makes us uncompetitive. The Consumer Council is there to assist us, and I think they have a big job of work, and the chairman in his new role in his new 3-year term will have a massive work, and I hope the Minister agrees. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Anyone else? Minister.
Thank you, sir, and I'd like to thank the Chief Minister, Deputy Tadje, and Deputy Joseph for speaking. And I just wanted to welcome Deputy Joseph back speaking in the Assembly, sir. It's good to hear. I'm really pleased to be able to say that in response partly to Deputy Joseph, he says, and these are the words, I do hope Mr Walker won't mind me using his words, which he sent to me, but he says in his own words, we have lots to do and want to achieve, with the only motivation to help ordinary islanders simply get by and to ensure we are all being treated fairly. I think he puts that really well as his motivation for the work that the Consumer Council does. I have to say that the Consumer Council is, in my view, one of the kind of underpraised, I don't think that's a phrase, underlauded perhaps, kind of institutions in the island. I think the work they do is absolutely superb. They do it on a very, very small budget, modest budget, I should say, and it is done principally by, their work is principally done by volunteers, and I think that's amazing because they're doing all that work for us. So I do thank all the members of the council and all the people who help that council as well. To Deputy Tadje, I'd really like to thank him and his panel for their comments, which I hope members have read. They're really helpful comments, and I can say to the Assembly it was not easy when faced with this question of should we seek to change the Constitution to allow Mr Walker to stand for another 3 years or not, because I have often spoken in this Assembly about the importance of limiting terms of office, and I know I believe the Institute of Directors guidelines say 6 years is an appropriate term. 9 years is that bit too much, but what this does do is align it with all the other states' bodies, so ALOs, states-owned entities, and so on, all have 9-year limits. So this brings that in line with that. So it's one reason for it. And the other was, just in this case, to enable Mr Walker and the council that he's worked with to do the work that they weren't able to do, because they did have ambitious plans that they could undertake, and because of COVID and Brexit and various other matters, they were really restricted in what they could do. If I could just help you understand some of the work they're doing, sir. They're looking at issues such as the recovery of costs for gas customers caused by outages, the matter of insurance providers pulling out of the island, or increasing prices. Through their price comparison website, they are putting constant pressure on grocery prices and petrol prices. And they're also looking at the matter of credit card applications, as well as that consumer fare that they want to do. So that's just a small taste of some of the work they're doing as principally volunteers, and like I say, with a very modest budget. So, sir, I hope I've satisfied particularly Deputy Tadje's questions, and I ask the Assembly to support the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Is the appellant called for? The appellant's been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. proposition has been adopted. 45 votes for, no votes contra, and 1 abstention. That concludes public business for this meeting. I invite the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangements of public business for future meetings.
Thank you, sir. Our next state sitting is on June the 11th, and there haven't been any changes since the publication of the consolidated order paper. So at the moment we have 8 items on the agenda. Pay gap reporting P13 2024, minimum wage increase to match the living wage P19 2024, Strategic Reserve Fund Long-Term Funding Plan P22 2024, Draft Unlawful Public Entertainments Jersey Regulations P24, Draft Income Support Law and Regulations Amendment Regulations P25, States of Jersey Development Company Limited New Articles of Association P26, Draft Social Security Law Amendment Regulations P27, and the Youth Service Statutory Provision P28. So bearing in mind that we have 8 items listed, we should be prepared to sit on at least Tuesday the 11th and Wednesday the 12th of June. So I make the proposition.
The proposition seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the public business as proposed by the Chair of PPC? Are members now content to adjourn until 9:30 on the 11th of June? We adjourn.